Well, I wasn't that wild. When it came down to it, I wasn't really that wild.
Sometimes you get the love of your life.
Tanya Tucker grew up in the spotlight, loved loudly, and lost just as publicly. From teenage superstardom to relationships that burned hot and fast, her personal life became almost as famous as her music. Some romances faded quietly, others left lasting scars, and one in particular changed her forever. Now, at 67, we finally know the man she never forgot about, even after the noise died down. Who was he? And why did he stand out from the rest? The rise of Tanya Tucker. Tanya Tucker became a legend at a very young age. She shot to fame as a teenager, dominating the country charts before she was old enough to vote. But behind the success was a life filled with turbulent relationships that kept leaving scars. And through all of it, there was one love she never truly moved past. A story that still surprises people today. Born Tanya Denise Tucker on October 10, 1958, she grew up in a working-class family where life wasn't flashy or glamorous. Her father worked as a heavy equipment operator, and her mother stayed home, holding the household together. Money wasn't abundant, but music was always present. Country songs played constantly. And from a young age, Tanya absorbed them naturally as part of everyday life. By around 8 or 9 years old, she was already stepping onto small stages in Arizona, showing a level of confidence that didn't match her age. She didn't sing like a child trying to imitate adults. She sounded grounded, raw, and emotionally aware in a way that caught people off guard. Her talent eventually caught the attention of legendary producer Billy Sherrill, who heard her demo and signed her to Columbia Records. It was a huge moment, but it came with enormous pressure. In 1972, at just 13 years old, she released Delta Dawn. The song exploded. It climbed to number 6 on the country charts and turned her into a national sensation almost overnight. Radio listeners were stunned when they learned the voice behind the song belonged to a teenager. She wasn't marketed as cute or innocent. She was presented as serious, emotional, and bold. What made Tanya stand out was that she didn't fade as she got older. Many child stars struggle to grow with their audience. Tanya didn't. She evolved. On her 16th birthday, she signed a lucrative deal with MCA Records, a move that gave her more control and expanded her reach. Her sound matured, her image sharpened, and her presence became even more commanding. As she grew into adulthood, she developed a rough-around-the-edges persona that set her apart from many female artists of the time. She leaned into an outlaw country image, often compared to artists like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson. She wasn't trying to fit into a neat box. She indulged in unsafe habits, spoke her mind, and lived loudly. That independence drew fans in, but it also drew relentless tabloid attention. Tanya's career has spanned several decades, and in 2019, her album, While I'm Livin', won Best Country Album at the Grammys. The following year, Bring My Flowers Now, co-written with Brandi Carlile, won Best Country Song. It felt like the industry was finally catching up to what fans had known for decades. In 2023, Tanya Tucker was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, cementing her place as one of the genre's true icons. With an estimated net worth between $50 and $60 million, her career stands as proof of longevity, resilience, and relevance. Younger artists like Miranda Lambert and Brandi Carlile openly credit her as an influence, not just for her music, but for her refusal to shrink herself. But success never protected Tanya from heartbreak. Behind the awards, the money, and the applause were struggles most people didn't see, and relationships that left lasting damage. The dark side of fame. By the time Tanya Tucker reached adulthood, fame was no longer something new or exciting. It was constant, demanding, and unforgiving. She had grown up inside it, and by the late 80s and into the 90s, the pressure began to show in ways that affected both her career and her personal life. Her chart success slowed during this period. While she continued releasing music and touring, the momentum she once had wasn't as consistent. Industry insiders often linked this decline to the growing focus on her off-stage life. Stories about her behavior, her relationships, and her image began to compete with the music itself. For an artist who had been working professionally since childhood, the shift was exhausting. Tanya's lifestyle became a regular topic of conversation. Reports circulated that she resisted changing certain habits, even when friends and people close to her expressed concern. She didn't hide the fact that she lived hard. That honesty appealed to some fans, but it also raised alarms. The music industry had always been more forgiving of excess when it came from male stars. For a woman, especially one who had entered the spotlight so young, the reaction was far harsher. Her outlaw image, once celebrated for its boldness, began to work against her. Nashville was still deeply conservative when it came to how female country singers were expected to behave. Tanya didn't fit that mold, and she never tried to. As a result, she faced criticism that went beyond music. Her choices were scrutinized in ways that her male counterparts rarely experienced. Every appearance, every interview, and every rumor became a headline. Tabloids followed her closely, amplifying mistakes and turning private struggles into public spectacles. Because she had been famous since her early teens, there was no clear line between who she was and who the public thought she should be. That constant attention made it difficult to reset or quietly regroup when things went wrong. Legal and business problems added another layer of stress to her life. Over the years, Tanya faced disputes tied to management and contracts, situations that drained time, money, and energy. These conflicts didn't always make major headlines, but they contributed to a sense that her career was constantly being pulled in different directions. Decisions made earlier in life, often under pressure, continued to follow her. The most public legal battle came in 2003, when she became involved in a custody dispute with her ex-fiancé Jerry Lasseter over their daughter, Layla. The situation played out in the media, placing her personal life back under intense scrutiny. Court appearances, legal filings, and public commentary added pressure at a time when she was already dealing with career uncertainty. And this exposure was deeply uncomfortable. But Tanya's struggles didn't end there. Years of touring, performing, and maintaining a demanding lifestyle took a toll on her physical health. Friends and fans constantly worried about her long-term well-being, especially when she showed signs of exhaustion or illness. Sadly, those concerns grew more serious in 2023, when she suffered from severe bronchitis and reportedly required oxygen support. News of her condition sparked renewed discussion about the physical cost of decades in the spotlight. Through all of this, Tanya kept working. She didn't retreat or disappear. She continued recording, performing, and showing up, even when the environment around her felt unstable. But it was clear that fame, especially fame that began so early, came with long-term consequences. And by the end of the 90s and into the early 2000s, it was evident that Tanya Tucker's challenges were no longer just about music charts or album sales. They were about survival in an industry that had watched her grow up and still expected her to perform without faltering. Fame had given her everything early and demanded just as much in return. But while the public focused on her image, her personal relationships were becoming more complicated, more intense, and more damaging with time. A string of turbulent relationships. One of Tanya Tucker's earliest and most talked-about romantic relationships was with Merle Haggard. Tanya was still young, yet famous, when their paths crossed. Merle, on the other hand, was a legend by then. He was older, experienced, and carrying a complicated personal history. They met naturally through touring, industry events, and shared circles, where proximity often blurred professional and personal lines. While their relationship was never long-term, it drew attention almost immediately. Part of that came from the age difference, and part came from Merle's reputation. He had been married multiple times and was known for living intensely, both on and off the stage. Tanya, still growing into adulthood under public scrutiny, found herself connected to someone whose life was already deeply complicated. Tabloids followed the story closely, sometimes exaggerating it, sometimes filling in gaps with speculation. The romance didn't last, and people close to the situation later suggested that timing played a major role. Merle's personal life was unstable, and Tanya was still figuring out who she was beyond the image the industry had created for her. The imbalance made it difficult for anything steady to develop. What's notable is how Tanya spoke about Merle afterward. She never framed the relationship with bitterness or regret. Instead, she consistently separated the man from the artist. She spoke with admiration about his music and his influence on country music, even while acknowledging that a personal relationship between them wasn't sustainable. But this relationship wasn't the only turbulent one Tanya found herself in. Not long after, she became involved with Andy Gibb, the youngest brother of the Bee Gees. Andy was a pop superstar in the late 1970s, and like Tanya, he was navigating fame at a very young age. They met through the entertainment industry, where music genres mattered less than visibility and access. Both were young, famous, and surrounded by people who treated chaos as normal. Their relationship was described as brief, but deeply emotional. It wasn't casual. It moved quickly, fueled by shared experiences that few people around them could understand. Behind the scenes, Andy struggled with substance abuse, a habit that was already taking hold when they were together. Tanya later acknowledged how difficult it was to be close to someone battling personal demons, while also trying to hold herself together. Fame didn't protect either of them. If anything, it made everything louder and harder to escape. The relationship eventually ended, not because the feelings disappeared, but because the situation became unsustainable. Andy's issues continued to worsen, and the pressure surrounding him grew heavier. Tanya moved on, but the experience stayed with her. In later reflections, she spoke about how painful it was to care deeply for someone who couldn't stabilize their own life. Andy Gibb died young, and that loss gave the relationship a different weight in hindsight. It wasn't just a chapter that closed. It became one that ended without resolution, leaving questions and emotions that never had a chance to settle properly. By the late 1980s and early 90s, Tanya entered one of the most significant relationships of her life, and it was with actor Ben Reed. Unlike some of her earlier romances, this one lasted years and brought major changes. They met through mutual connections in the entertainment industry and built a life together during a demanding period of her career. The relationship resulted in 2 children, Presley, born in 1989, and Beau, born in 1991. Motherhood shifted Tanya's priorities, adding responsibility to a life that had already been intense for decades. The relationship eventually ended, with reports pointing to lifestyle differences and the ongoing pressure of Tanya's career. Even after the breakup, Ben remained present in her life through co-parenting, and their connection continued in a different form, centered on their children rather than romance. Tanya's relationships were passionate, public, and deeply affected by fame. Each one left its mark, and each one came with challenges that made long-term stability difficult. And as people watched these romances come and go, another question kept coming up. Why, after all of this, did Tanya Tucker never marry? Why she never married? For someone who spent most of her life in the public eye, one detail about Tanya Tucker has always stood out. She never tied the knot officially. Not once. And that wasn't because she lacked opportunities or meaningful relationships. It was because marriage, as an idea, never sat comfortably with her. Tanya has said more than once that she didn't feel a strong pull toward marriage. It wasn't a rebellion or a statement. She simply didn't feel compelled to do it. While many people around her moved from relationship to wedding plans as the expected next step, Tanya didn't see it that way. She enjoyed companionship, love, and connection, but she struggled with the idea of permanence that marriage represented. At different points in her life, she admitted that the thought of being locked in made her uneasy. That hesitation wasn't about commitment in general, because she committed deeply to her music, her family, and the people she loved. It was the legal and symbolic weight of marriage that made her pause. She valued freedom, space, and the ability to move through life without feeling boxed into a role. That mindset became clearer during her relationship with Jerry Layseter, a Nashville musician and songwriter. Jerry worked within the country music world, though he never reached Tanya's level of fame. They met through the Nashville music community in the 1990s, where personal and professional circles often overlapped. Their connection grew naturally out of shared time, shared people, and shared understanding of the industry. They began dating soon after, and the relationship moved quickly. It wasn't casual. It became serious enough that marriage entered the conversation. They got engaged, and for a while, it looked like Tanya Tucker might finally walk down the aisle. The wedding was planned. Invitations were out. The date was close. Then, just days before it was scheduled to happen, Tanya called it off. She later explained that the timing didn't feel right. She didn't want to rush into marriage simply because it was expected. There was also a deeply personal reason behind her decision. She was pregnant at the time, and she felt strongly that she didn't want her daughter to grow up seeing wedding photos of her mother visibly expecting. She worried it might embarrass her later in life, and that mattered to her more than appearances or tradition. Calling off the wedding was difficult and public. It drew attention and speculation, as everything in her life tended to do. But for Tanya, it was an honest decision. She trusted her instincts, even when they went against what others expected her to do. Jerry Layseter remained part of her life because of their daughter. But the relationship didn't lead to marriage. And despite that close call, Tanya didn't reverse her feelings about the institution itself. She didn't see the canceled wedding as a failure. She saw it as confirmation that she had listened to herself. Another reason why she never got married was her love for independence. Tanya came of age in a time when women in country music were still expected to fit a certain mold. Marriage was often part of that image, but Tanya resisted it. She wanted to live life on her own terms, without having her identity tied to being someone's wife. Her name, her career, and her choices mattered to her more than checking a box. Her career also played a role. Touring schedules, recording sessions, and long stretches away from home were her normal. Settling into a traditional married life would have required compromises she wasn't sure she wanted to make. Music wasn't just her job. It was the center of her life, and it demanded flexibility that marriage didn't always allow. There was also the pattern of her relationships themselves. Many were intense, emotional, and fast-moving. Passion came easily. Stability did not. Over time, that made marriage feel less practical. She knew herself well enough to recognize that a legal commitment wouldn't magically fix instability. Even years later, Tanya has said she doesn't regret never marrying. There's no bitterness in how she talks about it, no sense of loss. She sees her choice as consistent with who she is. She loved deeply, lived fully, and followed her instincts, even when they led her away from the altar. Still, despite all the relationships that came and went, there was one man she has spoken about differently from all the rest. One connection that stayed with her long after it ended. The love of her life, Glenn Campbell. By the time Glenn Campbell entered Tanya Tucker's life, he was already a legend. He wasn't someone on the rise or chasing relevance. He had been famous for years, with a string of hits that crossed country and pop lines, and a reputation as one of the most gifted guitar players in the business. Songs like Rhinestone Cowboy and Gentle on My Mind had made him a household name, and his television work only expanded his reach. Glenn carried himself like someone who had seen it all, because he had. Tanya met Glenn in 1980, shortly after he divorced his third wife. At that point, Tanya was only 22 years old, while Glenn was 44. Both were deeply embedded in the country music world, surrounded by the same managers, musicians, and industry events. Their age difference didn't slow things down. If anything, it added to the pull. Glenn was experienced, confident, and commanding. Tanya was young, famous, and already battle-hardened by a childhood in the spotlight. Once they connected, the relationship moved fast. Tanya moved into Glenn's home, and they quickly became inseparable. Wherever Glenn went, Tanya was there. Wherever Tanya showed up, Glenn wasn't far behind. The press noticed immediately. Photographers followed them. Fans talked about them constantly. It was impossible for their relationship to stay private, even if they had wanted it to. Within a year, they were engaged. To the outside world, they looked like something straight out of a country music fairy tale. Two stars from different generations, bonded by music, fame, and obvious chemistry. They performed together, attended events together, and were often photographed smiling, arm in arm. For Tanya, the connection was intense. Glenn was the love of her life. Not just a boyfriend, not just an engagement that didn't work out, but the person who left the deepest mark on her heart. Being with Glenn changed how she saw herself and how she moved through the world. He influenced her musically, emotionally, and personally. But behind the scenes, the relationship was far from smooth. Arguments were frequent. Breakups and reconciliations became part of their routine. Tanya later admitted that she knew how to push Glenn's buttons and that they both had strong personalities that clashed often. When things were good, they were very good. When things went wrong, they unraveled quickly. Substance abuse made everything worse. Glenn was struggling heavily with addiction and alcoholism during this period. His behavior could be unpredictable, and mood swings were common. There were moments when his personal battles spilled into public view, creating tension not just between them, but around them. Tanya, still young and deeply in love, was pulled into that world. She began drinking more heavily and experimenting with illicit substances while they were together. The lifestyle became part of the relationship. Late nights, constant stimulation, emotional highs followed by sudden crashes. What felt exciting at first slowly turned into something destructive. Tanya later acknowledged that being with Glenn played a role in her own struggles with addiction. The chaos started to take a toll on her career as well. Focus slipped. Stability became harder to maintain. The same passion that fueled her music now made it harder to stay grounded. The relationship wasn't just intense, it was exhausting. Eventually, it became clear that love alone wasn't enough. The engagement ended after about a year. There wasn't one dramatic breaking point. It was the buildup of constant fighting, the strain of addiction, the age difference, and two lives moving at speeds that didn't align. What they had was real, but it wasn't sustainable. After the breakup, their paths split sharply. Glenn went on to marry Kimberly Woolen in 1982 and began building a more settled life. Tanya was left to deal with the aftermath. The relationship didn't just end emotionally. It left behind habits, wounds, and patterns that took years to confront. Even decades later, Tanya never softened the truth about that time. She didn't pretend it was healthy or romantic in hindsight. She spoke about it honestly. The love was deep. The damage was real. Both existed at the same time. She continued to speak about how much she loved Glenn, not because the relationship worked, but because it mattered. It was the kind of love that leaves marks, the kind that changes how you see the world afterward. She admitted that the passion came at a cost, and that she carried the scars long after they separated. This chapter forced Tanya to grow up quickly, in ways she wasn't prepared for. It showed her how powerful love could be, and how dangerous it could become when mixed with instability and addiction. It shaped the years that followed, influencing the choices she made and the boundaries she later tried to build. And yet, despite everything, it didn't close her heart completely. Love would find her again, not with the same chaos, not with the same intensity, but with something steadier and quieter. Finding love again with Craig Dillingham. Craig Dillingham didn't enter Tanya Tucker's life with headlines or drama. He had been there long before the fame, before the chaos, before the heartbreaks that defined so much of her adult life. He was a singer-songwriter from Texas, respected in country music circles, even if he never reached Tanya's level of stardom. His career was steady rather than explosive. He performed with Ray Price, opened shows for Willie Nelson, and spent years working the road the traditional way, learning the business without being swallowed by it. What makes their story unusual is how early it began. Tanya and Craig first met when they were both just 13 years old at a radio station in Fort Worth, Texas. At that point, neither of them was famous. They were kids with big dreams, guitars, and a shared love of country music. There was no romance then, just familiarity. Two young artists crossing paths at the very beginning, unaware of how far apart their lives would eventually travel. After that early meeting, their paths separated. Tanya rose fast and hard into superstardom, living a life that moved at an entirely different speed. Craig continued building a career that stayed closer to home, grounded in regional success and live performance. They didn't stay close, but they didn't disappear from each other's world either. Over the years, their names came up through mutual friends, shared connections, and the same music community that had first brought them together. It wasn't until decades later that something shifted. By then, Tanya had lived through intense relationships, public breakups, addiction, and recovery. She had loved deeply and paid heavily for it. When she and Craig reconnected later in life, the timing was different. There was no rush, no pressure to impress, and no need to prove anything. What they shared already had a foundation built on history rather than hype. They officially began dating in the late 2010s. Tanya described the relationship as something that felt natural from the start. Craig wasn't a stranger stepping into her world. He was someone who had always been nearby. Someone who understood where she came from without needing explanation. That familiarity gave the relationship a sense of ease she hadn't experienced before. As their relationship became public, the contrast with her past romances was noticeable. Craig began accompanying Tanya to major events, including the ACM Awards and Grammy celebrations. He stood beside her quietly, without trying to share the spotlight. There were no dramatic headlines, no public arguments, and no chaos trailing behind them. For fans who had followed Tanya's life for decades, the difference was striking. Tanya spoke about Craig with a calm confidence that hadn't been there before. She wasn't trying to convince anyone. She simply stated how she felt. At one point, she said, "If it ain't him, I'm done." It wasn't said as a grand declaration. It sounded more like certainty. After everything she had been through, she knew what she could and couldn't live with. What surprised many people was that Tanya, who had spent her entire adult life avoiding marriage, began to reconsider that stance. She had always been clear about valuing independence and resisting traditional expectations. But with Craig, she admitted that marriage no longer felt impossible. Not because she felt pressured, but because the relationship didn't threaten her sense of self. The contrast with Glenn Campbell was unavoidable. Where that relationship had been fueled by intensity and emotional volatility, her bond with Craig was built on patience and familiarity. There were no extreme highs followed by crashes, no need to fix or rescue each other. Just two people who understood the cost of living recklessly and chose something steadier instead. Craig's presence brought peace rather than disruption. He wasn't competing with her past or trying to replace it. He accepted it. That acceptance allowed Tanya to settle into a version of love that didn't require constant effort to survive. It simply existed. They have been together for several years, and Tanya has continued to speak about Craig warmly, often referring to him as her forever man. This chapter of her life didn't erase the past. It didn't undo the heartbreak or the damage. But it showed that love didn't have to look the way it once did. What do you think about Tanya and Craig's relationship? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.